afternoon, and we are ready for part 2 of corporations, and that will finish off the week. On Wednesday, we looked at, let's go up here, we looked at terminology, the nature of corporations, corporate financing, and corporate stakeholders. Now, we're going to look at how they form a corporation and the powers that are allotted to a corporation and where they come from. We'll look at shareholders, we'll look at mergers and acquisitions, and finally we'll look at how to terminate those puppies. So let's get back up here to formation and powers. There are certain procedures that have to be followed for a corporation. That's why sometimes they, if you're really small, it may not be worth all the effort or paperwork that needs to be done. If you're large, you have plenty of resources, then this is the way you more than likely will go. First of all, you have to select a state to incorporate in. A lot of companies go to Delaware because they have very favorable laws and rulings there, and fewer limitations. You must secure a corporate name. It must not be similar or the same as any other corporation. And then you prepare the articles, which is would be the name of the corporation, number of shares, the address of it, name and address of each person who's incorporating the corporation, and then you have to file those with the state, and you have to wait to see if they're accepted. And once they're accepted, then you will have to set up certain documents and rules and regulations for that corporation. Usually you're going to have a first meeting where you'll pull all of this together. You'll have the articles of incorporation. You'll have to follow the law of that state that you're incorporated in. You will need to look at state and federal constitutions to make sure you're within the boundaries of those statutes. At the very first meeting, you create bylaws, which are guidelines that must be followed. And then there are periodically throughout the life of the corporation resolutions that would come from the board. So that's where all of the powers come from for a corporation. They're developed throughout all of the documentation that it takes to form that corporation. Then there's an interesting doctrine, I guess you could call it. It's called piercing the corporate veil. And remember how we're always talking about a shareholder has very limited liabilities, and it's usually just to the investment. Well, piercing the corporate veil is where the court system may expose shareholders to more liability than just their investment. And that can happen if there's corporate abuse for personal benefit. A lot of times your corporation is formed and the officers and the executives and board of directors also can have the majority of the shares, which gives them a little more power than your minority shareholders. They can abuse that power, and if it is found that they do, then they become liable for more than just that investment. If somebody is tricked or brought into a situation falsely, if the corporation does not have enough capital behind it, then there can be more liability brought forward to the majority of the shareholders. If procedures aren't followed, these procedures here that were called powers right here, if those aren't followed, and the people who aren't following them are the majority of the shareholders, then they could be liable for more than just that investment. And then sometimes you will have personal and corporate interests commingled, which means that maybe the president of the company is writing out private checks or writing out corporate checks for private items, or maybe the bills are getting mixed in. So if that happens and it causes the corporation to be in jeopardy, then that can open up a whole area where that person would be liable for more than just their investment. So that's your formations and powers, and it looks like we have a couple of questions for you to take care of. So if you will go take care of your questions, I will meet you at Shareholders right here. Okay, got the questions done? Let's continue then. Shareholders. Shareholders are owners at FAR, but they aren't really agents. Remember we talked about agency back about 2 chapters ago? They are not what you would call employers. They are simply owners of the company, owners at FAR. They have rights. Most of the rights are, I think we've got most of them listed here. There may be some others that aren't. There are voting rights, and if you can't be there in person or you want to vote as a block, you would give your voting rights to a proxy who could vote for you. You should have stock certificates, which are kept on record. You have preemptive rights, and you have the right to dividends. And you can appeal for a dividend if you think that the corporation is not sharing profits as well as they should be. You have the right of inspection of any of the financial statements or any of policy and procedure that comes through the corporation. And you have the right that you can transfer your stock to anybody you wish. So you can transfer your ownership back and forth to your children or to whomever. There's a derivative suit, which is kind of interesting because a derivative suit is when a third party has committed something against a corporation and the officers or the executives will not push the issue or will not maybe file suit against them. The shareholders can come together and file what they call a derivative suit to force the officers and the board of directors to face the issue and take care of it. So there are some duties that a shareholder has. They can be held liable in some cases. The pierced veil was what we just talked about. And there can be some issues if you are a majority shareholder, such as officer or an executive, and you exclude shareholders. So you have to make sure that everybody is inclusive and there's no conspiracy or even the hint of a conspiracy. Again, a question. Again, I shall meet you at mergers and requisitions. So here we are. Now there are many ways for mergers, companies to combine or to buy each other. One is called a merger, and this is when two companies combine and only one exists in the end. That would be like Pepsi-Cola and Coke merging, and Coke only being the one that was recognized after the merge. And they have what they call an articles of merger. Imagine that. You can consolidate, where you combine two companies and they create a new company, and the two combined companies, they no longer exist as an entity. It's a new company, and they run by the articles of consolidation. You have a share exchange, which is very similar to a holding company. In fact, it is a holding company where they exchange shares and move things offshore. No matter what kind of merger or consolidation or exchange it is, they have procedures that have to be followed. The board must approve them. There must be a plan for terms and condition of any of the above. The majority of shareholders must approve it, and the surviving company files the plan. And after all that is said and done, the state has to approve or disapprove whether it will be accepted. There's something called a short form merger, and that's usually accomplished without approval, but the parent company must have 90% ownership already in the company that's being the short form merger. So those are your forms of mergers. There are probably more. We're going to look at purchase of assets, which is a little bit different. But first, you need to go do a question, and I need to take a drink of water. So I will meet you at purchase of assets. So purchase of assets is when one company acquires just the assets of another company, and it doesn't require approval. They're just buying the physical assets of the company. The acquired company, however, needs approval from their shareholders. So that's saying if I decided I wanted to buy Staley's all of their equipment, I can buy it without the approval of my stockholders, but Staley's has to have the approval of their stockholders because those are assets that belong to their shareholders. There's successor liability and in an asset purchase, and usually liabilities are not the purchasers, except, okay, I mean, if I bought the assets, if I bought all the assets, I didn't buy the liabilities. The company that I bought the assets for is liable for their own assets. There are three exceptions. One is if it's an implied or expressed assumption. Again, we have implied. We have if it's a merger or consolidation, and then it's no longer a acquirement or a purchase of assets, and if it's a fraudulent sale to escape that liability, say between a parent company and another company. You can also purchase the stock, and that's something they call tender offers, and that's kind of a takeover. A tender offer is where the officers and the board of directors refuse the offer, but the third party takes it directly to the shareholders and makes an offer for the stock to them directly. The response can be favorable or unfavorable. It just depends. Usually it has to be above the stock price. There's so many, we could do a whole class on this. So just remember there are favorable and unfavorable. And again, the question, oh my. So go do it. Then we'll talk about termination. There are 3 ways to terminate a corporation. There's voluntary dissolution. By the shareholders, it has to be unanimous. By the board of directors, it also has to have the shareholders agreeing with it. And then they must file articles of dissolution. You have involuntary dissolution, which is by statute, by the state, or by the court for fraud, or if shareholders petition to shut it down through the courts. And finally, those two, somebody has to wind it up. Somebody has to wrap it down. And usually under a voluntary shutdown or dissolution, the board is responsible for winding it down. On an involuntary, more than likely the court's going to appoint a receiver to wind down and wrap up all of the loose ends. So that covers corporations. And you have a question, and I think you should probably do that question, and then I will wrap this up. Again, this is corporations. We've covered about everything I think you need to know at this point. So thank you.